Creator has a master plan. Happiness for every man. The Creator has a working plan. Happiness for every man. The Creator has a master plan. Peace and happiness for every man. The Creator makes but one.
And this is the Wisdom Table coming to you from Grand Houses in Harlem, USA. I'm Brother Leroy, co-hosting on the Wisdom Table, to be joined by Sister Esther, Sister Jenkins, Sister Shirley, Sister Eva, and others. This is a workshop where women learn, senior women learn how to operate and produce their own talk shows. I'm Brother Leary once again, thankful to the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to be with you and you to be with us, and to always remind you that whatever you hear on the Wisdom Table, don't believe anything if you sit and listen through the whole program. You're obligated to check it out yourself. Check out the facts that you hear on this show or any other show. Once again, we are very happy to have with us a brother who was instrumental in One Night in Miami. Before we do that, this program does not reflect the views, attitudes, whims, deeds, or any other proclivities of the management of this NYCHA development. Neither do the views expressed here reflect on the resident council. We thank them for allowing us to be a part of their independent radio station here in Harlem, 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. Our guest online is Brother Usman Kareem. We had him in part 2 on the film, actually the event itself, not the film. The event itself was part 1, where we talked about what happened on the night of Sonny Liston's being knocked out, technical knocked out by Cassius Clay. We went through that from a historic standpoint. This week, we're doing part 2, which is an assessment of the film, based on the fact that Brother Usman Kareem was a participant in that event. Brother Usman Kareem, thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam, my brother.
And it's always a pleasure, brother, when you see films made or documentaries made dealing with the Nation of Islam, and there's a lot to discuss around that. Even in the film that Will Smith appeared in. Any of these things that are done. So you were at the event the night of the Sonny Liston fight where Cassius Clay became the heavyweight champion, and you saw the film. So where would you like to start in terms of your observation of the film, based on you actually having been a participant in the event?
First of all, I would like to preface what I say by saying that I misspoke in the last interview. I injected a conversation that dealt with Ghana and the president of Ghana into the conversation that was first untrue. So I would like to apologize to you, the audience, and to my brother and to my son who corrected me on that participation. So,
okay.
Coming off of that, I'm now prepared to deal with the actual, what I heard, what I saw, action. And I'd like to begin by saying that I was told that it was a fictional presentation of an actual meeting. And in many ways, it was. It was make-up. It was make-believe. That was not the that was not the essence of the meeting itself. Okay, so shall we start from there? Question.
Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. That we talk about the fight, what happened right after. Well, we got to cover territory that we covered in part one. Folks can always see part one, but let's go back for the folks who didn't or may have forgotten, and that is, how did Malcolm come to be in Miami, and basically who was the catalyst for his being there?
Well, I would say this. Malcolm, prior to the meeting, was suspended by the Nation of Islam, the leader, Elijah Muhammad, for 90 days for making a statement, and then in a meeting about chickens coming home to roost, I think. So, right. Knowing that he was suspended, I called him and told him, brother, I know that it is not easy for you to remain silent. So what I would appreciate, I'm having so many problems down here in Miami, I would appreciate if you and your wife would accept the belated honeymoon and come down to Miami, and also to help me with the problems I'm dealing with in regards to the fight, and also to help Cassius Clay. And he, in turn, of course, asked me to talk to his wife. So I called my wife and asked my wife to call Sister Betty. And at that time, they had, I think, 3 children. But the invitation was extended to her and my wife, which is why I was successful. Because my wife was included in coming to Florida. But anyway, they, my wife and Malcolm and the children, and my wife and my children came down to Miami. What I did was I had, I think the hotel was called the Sir John or the Sir Charles Hotel, you know. But the accommodations were nice because it allowed them to cook, and it was more or less like a suite, you know. And Malcolm did come down, and Malcolm's coming down, I think, did create some of the problems for the fight promoters, because prior to that, we were having problems with Cassius Clay, whether or not he was a black Muslim or not, and also I did break camp one time while we were training for the fight. I broke camp because I thought that I had arranged a bazaar in New York City, and they were having problems with some of the artists at the bazaar if I wasn't there to deal with it. So I did break camp and break training camp, and flew up to New York City to the 369th Armory. And that did cause problems for the promoters and for the potential audience, you know.
Now,
So
Kareem, breaking camp means that you left but things stayed. The training went on, or you breaking camp meant that the training stopped for the time that you weren't there.
the trains and Cassius and I flew to New York City just overnight to attend and me to be there for the Muslim Bazaar.
Got it.
But upon arriving, we did notice that reporters and so forth were there, and they made a big deal out of it. Okay?
Right. And making a big deal out of it created a situation with the promoters.
It created a situation with the promoters, and it led to further controversy about Cassius Clay's status in relationship to the Nation of Islam. But that was quelled by, I had a meeting, a man named Maya Lansky invited me to a meeting as a result of that. The promoters were very upset, and we had a honest discussion. And Maya Lansky explained to me he didn't give a damn about me, Cassius Clay, or the Nation of Islam. We were free to do what the hell we felt we wanted to do. But part of our antics and things were interfering with the live gate. And he was concerned about that. And as a result, we came to an agreement that I would attempt to not do anything deliberately to interfere with the gate. And he would tell the promoters to leave me the hell alone, so to speak. So that was our basic agreement. I later on found out that Maya Lansky was like the man in the mob families. So whatever he said, and the truth of the matter is, I didn't have any further trouble with the promoters or the mob around Sonny Liston, and that was squash. Okay.
So you came to New York, and then you went back. At what point does Malcolm come in the picture down in Miami?
Malcolm, upon my request, Malcolm immediately came down to Miami along with his family. And one of the things that Malcolm did, being Malcolm X, he was very careful never to come into the place where we resided and for the training of the fight. However, he did come to the gym, and at the gym, the general public was welcome, So he, of course, came to the gym. I'm sorry. He also would meet us every morning when we did road work. The road work that Cassius Clay did, he would jog along with his camera, and after the road work, Malcolm would have conversation with Cassius Clay. And all I'm saying is that the conversations that he had with Cassius Clay, in my opinion, enabled Cassius Clay whatever odds were against him dealing with Sonny Liston, Malcolm was such an inspiration, in my opinion, to the training and leading up to the night of the fight. Malcolm, for instance, gave a spiritual dimension to Cassius Clay. Sonny Liston was an alleged one-punch individual who could knock you out with one punch. Cassius Clay, the night of the fight, he didn't see necessarily Sonny Liston as Sonny Liston, the one-punch knockout individual. He saw an individual who was fighting for white America and for the devil. And he was fighting for God and his people. So that's the spirit in which he entered the ring. Sonny Liston actually didn't stand a chance once Malcolm souped Cassius Clay up. And he did soup him up because Cassius Clay was at ring with Sonny Liston. That was God with a little G, fighting, participating. And Sonny Liston did not stand a chance. Much to the surprise of the audience and to the people who came to the fight. So I would say the odds had changed, but they didn't realize the work or the effect of Malcolm X's presence and his injecting Muhammad Ali with training. But also, we used to sit up every night looking at Sugar Ray Robinson, Jake LaMotta fights. And that contributed also because Jake LaMotta gave Sugar Ray Robinson some of the worst fights that Sugar Ray ever endured in the ring. And he fought him a couple of times, you know. So we used to watch the fight and we could see the effect that Jake LaMotta had on Sugar Ray Robinson, and we patterned part of the training along those lines. So we used that. You understand?
Yeah, the watching the film, Malcolm wasn't there. The Jake LaMotta Sugar Ray. Malcolm was or was not there?
No, he was not there.
Okay. The amount of time that Malcolm spent before the fight with Cassius Clay was approximately how much?
I would, my memory is not good, but I would say from the time that he received the suspension, which was like 2 days at the most. From then up until he immediately departed for Florida within 48 hours. Okay.
All right. So he was there at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, based on your memory?
I would say a month.
A month. Okay. So it wasn't the association of Cassius Clay with the nation, how was that picked up by the public? Meaning, what were the indicators to the public that, quote, the Muslims were around him, he was around Muslims?
Well, Cassius Clay used to make certain pronouncements and talk about him being the greatest and the prettiest, and But in addition to which, he took part of the nation's teachings from Honorable Elijah Muhammad and would quote them. So there was a suspicion that one, he was exposed to the black Muslims or the Nation of Islam, and two, he had embraced them. So, but he never quite confirmed openly that he was following a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. But he intimated through his talk and so on, he was a different kind of Negro, you know. And it was hard to figure out. And he loved it. He had a certain sincere love for his people that it generated and inspired the spirit of black people at that time. Many were not necessarily knocked out with his brashness, announcements, and so forth, but they felt as though this brother had a love for his people, and he endured them with this love, and especially to children. He could reach children. He would walk down the street, and children would gravitate to him like he was a pie paper, you know. And many of our people, they had disdain, perhaps, for his, I'm the greatest and I'm the prettiest, and they would say it openly. But our people felt a certain identity with Cassius Clay that even if he was a black Muslim, as far as they were concerned, that didn't make no doggone difference to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, his introduction to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad by way of whom or what?
Well, I would say there was a brother, Captain Sammy, in Miami, who at the time probably was, and see, he was based, Captain Sammy, who later on, his name was changed to Abdul Rahman. His residing in Miami and being the captain was very important because his access to Cassius Clay meant that he was almost a daily reminder and advocate for the teachings that only a captain at that time could express. However, Malcolm was there was a little dispute that came about whether Malcolm was the one responsible for Cassius Clay or Captain Sammy. To me, it doesn't matter. The main thing is that when Malcolm came to Miami, everything changed. Malcolm's presence in Miami, I don't care what you want or who you want to talk about, it changed because it was the embodiment of a spirit that Malcolm gave to a young kid named Cassius. You got to remember, he was only 22. Whether or not he was a member of the nation doesn't even matter. Because he didn't have access to Chicago or to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He had access to Malcolm X. And Malcolm X did a job on him. Being that you said you wanted me to kind of do an overview, my association with Cassius came as a result of my relationship with Malcolm.
Right.
Malcolm told me one day, he said, brother, tomorrow I'm going to have a meeting with a brother, and he's a fighter, and his name is Cassius Clay, and I would like for you to be at the meeting. I looked at him like he was, huh? I don't like boxers, and I definitely don't like that brash individual talking that talk. That was not commensurate with the individuals that I dealt with. I dealt with individuals or Negroes who, in my opinion, had a certain degree of achievement and recognition that did not include a loudmouth individuals such as Cassius Clay. I came out of show business. So my relationship was on a different level. But Malcolm, of course, then reiterated, I'm not asking you. I'm having this dinner, and I want you there. So, I, of course, on. But at the dinner, I'm sitting there, and this big mouth, loud mouth, individual talking this crap, and I tried to endure it to the best of my ability. But during the course of the dinner, I realized that Malcolm had made mention during the dinner that Cassius Clay was to have a meeting with a man named Joe Glazier. And that was the key to the meeting. He wanted Cassius to invite me to the meeting that he was having with Joe Glazier. So, of course, that made a little more sense. And as a result of the dinner, I did go to the meeting that Cassius Clay, who did not have an entourage, just him and I. As a matter of fact, I was living in the grand houses, 1315 Amsterdam Avenue at the time. And Cassius Clay pulled up with this big red Cadillac and came up to my apartment and took me down. And many people at the time recognized him, even though he wasn't the heavyweight champion at the time. Plus, in those days, my building was integrated. They had like 40% black occupancy at the time. So, anyway, make a long story short, I did go to the meeting with Cassius Clay, and Cassius didn't realize that I knew Joe Glazier. My association with Joe Glazier was through show business, through Lionel Hampton, especially through the Platters, because I was road manager for the Platters. And
Grant Houses Community Radio. The soul.
And this is Grand Houses Community Radio coming to you
side.
from 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. The program you're listening to is The Wisdom Table. I'm co-hosting Brother Leroy. And our guest online is Brother Usman Kareem. The discussion is leading up to a review of the film One Night in Miami. Usman Kareem was a participant in that meeting. He was not a butler. He was not going out for potato chips and stuff. He was a part of the meeting One Night in Miami. Continue. Joe Glazer.
So the minute we walked into the meeting, Joe Glazer got up from his seat. He said, "Kid." In all the years that I knew Joe Glazer, he always never called me by my name. He would always say, "Kid," you know, and that's the way he treated me. But anyway, my relationship with the Plotters led to Joe Glazer, who had a contractual arrangement with the Plotters, but he had that with something like, I would say, 85% of the blacks in show business. Dinah Washington, Dino Horn, the person I'm thinking of in particular.
Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong, Lionel Hampton, Duke Ellington, Max Rhodes. I mean, and let me put it this way. Joe Glazer, Billie Holiday, and Joe Glazer made a statement to me years before that. He said, "Brother, I own 85% of the niggas in show business, and the other 15% I control." That's what he said to me, and it turned out to be true. I don't know any Negroes in show business at that time who were not under Joe Glazer's control. Now, indirectly, part of that was because he represented the mob. And if you wanted to go to Las Vegas or any really venue for entertainment in America, you had to go to Joe Glazer because he had the black entertainers. And he had a relationship with every major hotel in Vegas and outside of America. As a matter of fact, the relationship that I enjoyed with Joe Glazer, I did Joe Glazer a favor. He had a problem with another Jew who was robbing him through double booking in England, France, and in Europe. And, of course, Joe Glazer was nobody to play with. So Joe Glazer's solution or answer to the problem was to deal with it one way. But after talking to me, I told him that I could supply him with the evidence that he needed to confront the Platter's manager, a man named Buck Graham, who was nothing other than a writer and had moved up to. But what happened was, outside the United States, Mexico, Germany, France, England, Buck Graham had a relationship with what they call impresarios, in which he would sign a contract with them that Joe Glazer wasn't aware of. And as the road manager, of course, I had access to the transactions. And part of the access was in a foreign country, you wanted to make sure that you had X amount of big artists, had X amount of money in American money, and X amount of money in the currency of the country in which you were being employed. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I knew of what the contracts read. Being that Joe Glazer was about to take a drastic move, I told her that don't do that. We can deal with this thing another way. And it involved a lot of money. So Joe Glazer rescinded whatever he was about to do and came on to me and my thing, so he didn't have to do that. And Buck Ram's life was spared. See?
Mm-hmm.
But Buck Ram, of course, did not ever again trust me. But he couldn't find me. I was hired by the Platters.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was under their control.
So you had done this. There was a connection, a relationship that you had with Joe Glazer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So back at the meeting, you're at that meeting that morning. Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, you, Joe Glazer. I think you mentioned in another interview, Joe Lewis's wife was an attorney. Was she present at that meeting?
She was not only present, she acted like Joe Glazer's secretary. She had drawn up the actual contract that Joe Glazer wanted Muhammad Ali to sign. You understand? And he was so sure of Cassius Clay signing the contract, he had them drawn up in advance. So when I come to the meeting, and he's saying, "Kid, how you do?" and tell Cassius who I am. And I turned to Cassius and I said, "This is a big nigga." That was my response. And it is true. Here, Joe Lewis's wife had drawn up a contract. He owned Joe Glazer. He owned Joe Lewis. He owned Sugar Ray Robinson. He owned many. Let me put it. There's very few people that I could think of in the entertainment world that he didn't have a connection to, at least through booking. So he was a big man. However, after I said that he was a big nigga and acknowledged who he was, there was a group that owned Cassius Clay. It was called the Louisville Sponsoring Group. He didn't see no problem with them. His problem, he felt, could be dealt with them, but he needed Cassius Clay's signature. And the ensuing conversation and lead up, what happened was, what I did was in the meeting, Joe Glazer, I never refuted anything that Joe Glazer said. It's just that I turned to Joe Glazer and I said, "Mr. Glazer, this one you can't have." And when I said that, I got up and Cassius got up. We proceeded out of the meeting was over. And we, that's how it was left. And of course, we went back and we reported back to Malcolm, who had waited all coming up to the Salon restaurant. And all the pastors could say, "Brother Malcolm, this is a big nigga." And it culminated in the following day, less than 24 hours. Cassius Clay came to where I was living, 1315 Amsterdam, and picked me up and took me to his hometown, Louisville, Kentucky. And that's what started my relationship with Cassius.
Okay, and in other interviews we have covered with you, you talked of the interaction with the Louisville group. Now, coming into the week of the fight, the Sonny Liston fight, and then we'll proceed to the circumstances that led to, quote, the meeting one night in Miami. So let's talk about that week coming up into the day of the fight.
It wasn't a week. It was actually many weeks because there was a whole campaign that the press had against Cassius Clay and his alleged being a black Muslim. But leading up to the fight, as a matter of fact, Chicago, I had gotten a call from John Ali. He was the national secretary, telling me to break the camp, which I did. I thought I took the instructions. But anyway, that's another story. But the Nation of Islam, although they had respect for Cassius Clay, they didn't believe. I'm talking about at headquarters. They didn't believe that Cassius Clay stood a chance against Sonny Liston. Malcolm was the big factor, and Malcolm being in Miami. So I would say in the week leading up to the fight, it was intensified. I had a meeting with the Louisville sponsoring group, which I made it very clear to them that after the fight, Cassius Clay would no longer have the relationship with them that they had. For instance, they had a 5-year extension on his contract. I said we would honor whatever contractual agreements they had, but we would not honor the contracts unless we made different provisions. For instance, they took advantage of the camp, the training camp, and the expenses and all that. I said that had to end. Cassius Clay would be in control of all of the expenses and his money and so forth like that, which they acknowledged to me. Under these circumstances, the 5-year extension didn't mean anything. They were breaking after the fight their whole contractual arrangements with Cassius Clay, for which I was happy, and I made it very clear to Cassius. Here's where Jim Brown comes in. Jim Brown, Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke had a relationship with Malcolm before or independent of Cassius Clay. Sam Cooke had a deal with Frank Schiffman, the owner of the Apollo Theater. And I had a relationship with him. And Frank Schiffman complained to me about Sam Cooke wanting to change the arrangement of how he employed Negroes to come to the Apollo Theater. And of course, I informed Frank Schiffman and his son, Bobby Shipman, that whatever it was that Sam Cooke was demanding, they had better give consideration to his demands. His demands were basically that he would split the gate at the Apollo Theater, and he would not do 5 or 6 shows a day. And they would become partners. That was the first time that the Apollo Theater under Schiffman actually consented to a revenue share with the artists. It was laid on continuing Brown. What's his name?
James Brown?
Who?
You said James Brown? Continue James Brown?
James Brown. Yeah. He followed through with the same thing. But it was Sam Cooke who did that. Sam Cooke also was one of the first artists to deal with his record company. Sam Cooke's contractual, he had an accountant by the name of Klein. Klein was basically his accountant. He was not his manager and owner. Upon Sam's death, for some strange reason, Klein wound up owning and removing Sam Cooke's family and J.W. Alexandria, all the people who Sam Cooke had in charge. He wound up with all of the invested interests of Sam Cooke's properties. As a matter of fact, what you need to do, and I didn't realize this, I forgot, my son pointed it out to me. Somebody, I think it was my son. I didn't realize. I saw the night in Miami, but I didn't even realize Regina King was the executive director. But Klein's son was one of the producers of One Night in Miami. Go back and check it out. He was one of the producers. But that's deviating from...
That's one of those research projects that the audience is duty bound to do, which they are jumping on right now. And they hear this. Let's go back. You were pointing out that Jim Brown. This is the week of the fight. Jim Brown comes into the picture. I'm not clear on that.
Oh, Jim Brown and Cassius Clay. I didn't have a real relationship with Jim Brown. Jim Brown, actually, my relationship really began after the fight. After the fight with Sonny Liston. You with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we had established a talking point that when Cassius Clay, in addition to which we were dealing with Louisville Sponsoring Group, we also dealt with the fight. At that time, the live gate was the only thing that produced revenues in a major fight. So we explored an avenue of revenue that was perhaps 10 times the live gate.
Now, when you say we, who's the we, and at what point is the we exploring opportunities beyond the live gate?
This was before the fight.
Before the fight?
Yeah.
Okay. Who's the we? Who is the we doing that?
Jim Brown, Cassius Clay, and I.
Okay.
And the reason for it, I didn't know Jim Brown well, but I knew that Jim Brown had an association with black athletes. He had what they call a mesbik. And I was encouraging him through his mesbik that they would go into some of the major cities that we could post a fight upon Ali being in Cassius Clay being in the chart. So I encouraged or explained, articulated that to Jim Brown. In the meantime, I also simultaneously set up a company in New York City called Cassius Clay Enterprise, which was to take or act as the organ for all of the revenue, any revenue that was produced by Cassius Clay. It would go into this corporation. And this would eliminate or subvert the Joe Glaciers or the Louisville sponsoring groups from being the one to dish out money to Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay would be his own money. And part of that comes from the only credibility that I have. I'm an accountant. I was a trained accountant. So my approach to all these business things was completely different. And we were in there, as a matter of fact, the truth of the matter is, the Nation of Islam, right after Cassius Clay won the championship, Jim Brown entered into an agreement with a man named John Ali, who was the national secretary, who had left the post of national secretary, and they formed a company along with Herbert Muhammad, who was the son of the Elijah Muhammad. They formed a company called Knockout Productions. And Knockout Productions set up an entity that was to represent Cassius Clay, the opening up theaters as an avenue of revenue that could produce more money than a live gate could produce.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back. That's after the meeting. That's something that developed after the meeting. However, we're going preceding the meeting, preceding the fight, and the night of the fight. You mentioned that you and Cassius Clay and Jim Brown were meeting on those kind of opportunities beyond
the fight. That's what the meeting was especially for. That meeting in Miami. That's what we discussed.
Okay, now let me go back. During the week of the fight, Jim Brown, Cassius Clay, and you had meetings or meetings leading up to the night.
And Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke.
Okay, so it was Cassius Clay, Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, yourself. Muhammad Malcolm wasn't present at those meetings.
No.
Okay, so the four of you were meeting and you were discussing these kind of opportunities that would come out of coming out of a victory by Cassius Clay. In fact, you weren't even talking about an if, you were talking about a win. A W-I-N and a W-H-E-N.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that kind of meeting, you had seen Jim Brown, but you really didn't have that kind of connection with Jim Brown. But at the meetings, the meeting or meetings preceding the fight night,
Yeah.
that was you were in, you were greetings, and as you said, the Mesbik, you learned that he was not just Jim Brown, but he represented a group of black athletes who wanted to do something independent of their contracts with their teams, whether they were basketball, baseball, football, whatever.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we're leading into that night, that one night in Miami. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead and proceed. So
Well,
let me go. Wait a minute. Let's go back. The meetings preceding the one night in Miami, Sam Cooke, Cassius Clay, Jim Brown, yourself. What was the participation? Who was doing what talking? Who was doing what agreement? Who was doing what questioning?
we don't have a meeting. The main person that's missing from these meetings is Malcolm X. Malcolm X doesn't come into play until the night of the fight after he won, after Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's when Malcolm X emerges as one of the key players. But he emerges actually, I'm the embodiment of Malcolm in the meetings. Because proof of it is, after Cassius Clay beats Sonny Liston, I go to Chicago to have dinner with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm not really aware that there is a problem with me. But how the problem emerges, when I talk to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I start explaining to him that I wanted to go. Cassius Clay had won the heavyweight championship, and I really wanted to get out of America and get the pressure off of the United States government and the mob and all that. I wanted to get that off of me, and I wanted to get it off of Cassius Clay. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad looked at me as if to say, "Are you kidding?" He said, "Brother, you just got here." And I'm teaching our people, what the hell do we have to go back to Africa? You want to take us back to Africa? So basically the conversation ended because I knew he had expressed his disagreement with my approach. So of course I left. I left Chicago. I go to New York. Malcolm meets me at the airport. He said, "How'd it go, brother?" And I explained to him the messenger's reaction. So he sat me down for 3 days. And he gave me a different angle and approach on how to approach the messenger. But he sent me back to Chicago. And part of the change was I explained to the messenger that for over 2.5 years, Malcolm and I, during the course of the week, over a period of over 2 years, we had interaction with ambassadors on a level in a social gathering that we had relationships with Africa and Muslim world ambassadors that could come into play and made what I was approaching them about a possible reality.
You're tuned in to GHBR.NYC, Grant Houses Community Radio.
That difference of approach made all the difference in the world. So when I go back to the messenger and I explain it from Malcolm, the way Malcolm had outlined it to me, the messenger, he read up, he said, brother, that's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
You are willing to take this valuable asset that I have and deliver it so that the part of it was that the black world and the Muslim world would be softened in terms of some of the negativity that they had toward us as so-called black Muslims. So I included Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Muslim countries and African countries in my itinerary. And the only thing the messenger said was, he said, brother, I bless you for that. He said, the only thing is, I would feel better if you would allow me to include a couple of people on the trip. So I said, of course. The first name that the messenger mentioned to me was a man named
Charles Howard.
Charles Howard, who was a correspondent and independent, so-called, of the nation. He was not a Muslim. He was an outright socialist or maybe a communist, but he had a personal relationship with the messenger. And he used to write, he had a column that he had in Muhammad Speaks from the United Nations. And I explained to him, not only would I welcome it, I said, I know Charles Howard. We hardly ever go down to the United Nations and meet with people that without first turning to Charles Howard and letting him know that we're coming down to the United Nations. And he was allowed to be part of our delegation of two. There was no captain and there was no FOI, just Malcolm and I. And these receptions generally were at nighttime by different countries and so forth like that. So I had a relationship with Charles Howard, or Malcolm had the relationship. And the messenger was shocked. I also explained that we had already contacts. I'll tell you, in Syria, Iran, Egypt, we had a couple of African countries. We had relationships. They would plug in to the Sunday broadcast most every Sunday. So they knew what we were teaching and they knew our thinking. And they made it very clear that not only were we welcome, but they would pick up the course for each country that we went to. These countries would pick up the course of our entourage. So, of course,
I want to stop right there and come back. We're coming back. You said that you learned that you were the problem. You were a problem with other forces other than the mob, the Louisville, and the wannabe promoters, etc. Before we go there, I want to go back to how the meeting one night in Miami actually occurred. Talk about the preliminary meetings during the week. The night of the fight, Cassius Clay is champion, and you talk about on your way to the dressing room. You didn't jump in. You jumped in the ring for a minute. People can see. People can see you very quickly in the ring. You're wearing a hat, but I think a straw hat, white straw hat, something.
Yeah.
Black band. Okay.
Yeah.
So folks can see this person who they're listening to if they go to the clip. We don't have the clip, but if they go, okay, now you're going to the dressing room. You're on your way to the dressing room. Talk about what happens.
That was out of character for me to jump into the ring and embrace. That's not me.
I'm laughing. Kareem, I'm laughing because you're saying it's not you. I saw you. I saw you break the whole.
When I say it's me, but it's not characteristic of Osman Kareem. Okay?
Yeah.
So I'm still emotional. That was an emotional state that I just gravitated to for the moment. And I was overjoyed over the fact that he was now declared the heavyweight champ in the world. And I get out of the ring and I'm heading toward the dressing room. But I'm still emotionally spinning off of Wallace. So Malcolm grabs me. He says, "Brother, let's go someplace in private." So I'm figuring him and I go from the ring. So I go into the dressing room, and the first thing, all the Muslims and all of the press, there's a cadre of officials from Chicago over there. And they hugging and they embracing like, anyway. So and I whispered in Cass's ear, I said, "Brother, I'm leaving." I said, "I'm going to away from this crowd, and Malcolm and I are going to meet." He looks at me. He said, "Wait a minute." He spent the damn dime, and he says that he's coming with us. So now it's the three of us. And as we're going down the hall, Sam Cooke and Jim Brown spot us leaving, and they join. Now, nobody else would have the audacity to cut into our entourage. I'm talking about the officials from Chicago or nobody else. But we spring over to the Sir John Hotels, which is where Malcolm is staying. And that's how we wound up. That was how the meeting was convened between the five of us.
Okay, now, the meeting itself. Talk about whatever you can share about the impromptu. It's an impromptu meeting, but it's a continuation of meetings that you had during the week, with the exception that not at this meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What happens is Jim Brown and Sam Cooke, for the first time, they come to see the role. Now, I'm sitting with, all during the fight, I'm sitting with Malcolm X. Not embraced by Chicago officials or nobody else. But they could see that there was a little tension between Chicago and Malcolm. don't have to spell it out to people like Jim Brown and Sam Cooke. So we immediately dove into the roles that they would play in terms of this new surge of Cassius Clay Enterprises. They would spin off of Cassius Clay Enterprises and begin to do their thing, so to speak. Okay? That was the nucleus of the conversation and at the meeting. There's no way that in a closed meeting, Sam Cooke would jump up and talk to Malcolm the way they portrayed it in the movie. There's no way that Jim Brown would be a party to a sanction of Sam Cooke's antics. And there was no way that Muhammad Ali would be in disagreement with Malcolm. To the contrary, what I say to you, that meeting became the catalyst for not what had transpired a week before, a month before. It became the catalyst for what actually happened. What actually happened was Jim Brown went out and formed this corporation, Knockout Production, in which he was involved with John Ali and Herbert Muhammad. Knockout Productions was dissolved almost immediately by a man named
Bob Arum.
Bob Arum exposed the corporation that they had set up. It could not be legal because Herbert Muhammad was moving on, becoming the official manager or representative for Cassius Clay. I don't know anything about this. John Ali is the national secretary to the nation. So this really fortifies the nation's involvement. So Bob Arum dismisses that and forms a thing called, whatever the name was, but he formed this company called Top Rank. And he excludes Herbert Muhammad from the group. He brings Jim Brown in, and actually that entity becomes a quasi-promotional piece for Ali up until Ali's departure from boxing. But more important,
let's go back. I'm sorry, more importantly, Top Rank is still in existence today. Right.
They still exist. It is so involved in boxing and has played a hand in all of Muhammad Ali's fights.
Let's go back. The entity, Knockout Productions, was going to be exactly that, producers of the fight. Bob Arum's...
Not necessarily producers of the fight. They were going to set up a entity of live gates through closed circuit that would represent...
That comes out of the meetings that Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, and Cassius Clay leading up to the fight.
Yes.
Nobody else had that concept, that idea. If they did, we wouldn't even be talking now. That idea culminated or crystallized the night of the fight, but it was already in motion. It was already in motion with the discussions of Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke was an independent individual anyway. Jim Brown was independent. All right. Cassius Clay was independent after he got the teachings. Actually, I don't know I only met him once, but he was of the nature who wanted to be independent. So when the teachings came to him, it was like water and fish meeting up with one another. That's a Brother Leroy proverb.
Yeah. You're on the money, brother.
Okay, so here, when you talk about Bob Arams and he sets up a like entity, gets Herbert Muhammad to drop out of Knockout Productions, involves himself in some kind of way. It's Top Rank. He's going to be on top. He's going to be on top. He's going to be on top, which is the teachings that we have in terms of how people operate to be on top of Black people.
Yes.
There's another teaching of offering more gold for our labor.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going back to the meeting. I'm dealing with the meeting. You're pointing out things that you saw in the film that made you start. This is Brother Leroy talking. I was not there when you saw the film. Made you stand up and say, "What the hell is this? This ain't never happened, and it would not have happened." I need you to go back into that fabric, because even though it's fiction, it creates a reality in the minds of people who do not have contrary information.
Okay. First of all, when you go back to the film, you see that the name Kareem is mentioned. But Kareem is the security FOI outside of the meeting.
Brother Leroy missed that word. Wait, go back. Just say it over again. Say it over again, nice and clear, because this is a review. Everything up to this point was talking about historical. Now we're talking about review of the film.
Yeah.
Kareem,
in the film,
outside the
in the film, they make mention of my name a couple of times, and they have me playing a role. But I'm the man who's standing out securing to see that nobody comes into the meeting. I'm the door checker, so to speak. I'm actually in the meeting.
Very good. Very, very good. Okay. So you see this thing, and you see this. Talk about the imagery that. Look, I'm looking at Malcolm. I only met the man one time, seen him speak, but I only met him one time. And that was brief. That was through Brother Peter Bailey introduced me to him. It was brief. But there's an image of Malcolm. There's an image of Sam Cooke. There's an image of Jim Brown. There's an image of Muhammad Ali portrayed in that meeting. What is contrary to your experience with those individuals?
Nobody in that meeting or any place else in public would have been projected in the manner in which Sam Cooke and Jim Brown were projected as arguing or fussing with Malcolm X. Nobody. That's the first thing. Right? Malcolm X was not to be messed with. Okay? You have to be very careful about your language. Now, what they did was they had Sam Cooke talking about knocking off some women in the movie with Malcolm X being president. Hello?
Mm-hmm.
They also have Sam Cooke a couple of times passing a fast of alcohol to Muhammad Ali. Everybody knows Muhammad Ali never drank.
Mm. Mm.
The thing that him and Sam Cooke had in common was an indulgence in perhaps dealing with women. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
But you would never mention a concert and a setup where Ali and Sam Cooke were going to have this meeting and indulge in a sexual activity with any females. Not in front of Malcolm. You couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, Jim Brown, they have Jim Brown saying, not only am I a womanizer, I like white women.
Mm-hmm.
That he states in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he would never say that in front of Malcolm.
Mm-hmm.
He had a relationship not only with Malcolm, he had a relationship with Minister Farrakhan and Farrakhan's children.
Mm-hmm.
That far exceeds that initial involvement with the black Muslims. So, all I'm saying, you have to take that into consideration, brother.
Okay, now, imagery of Malcolm. The imagery of Malcolm in that meeting. The question is, how did that meet with reality of how he would have conducted himself talking, and I'll be specific, talking to Sam Cooke and berating him the way he did in that meeting in terms of trying to win him over?
I was around Malcolm for many years, brother. I have never, ever, and I've been in some close meetings with Malcolm and other people, and personalities, and I have never seen him berate a black person in any way. He would find a way to uplift you. But what it was, that is the month that all the things that you hear them talk about is actually Malcolm dealing with Cassius Clay prior to the fight.
No, give me that over again. Say that over again, brother. I'm missing something.
What it is, him talking to Cassius Clay. And part of it was him bringing out certain do's and don'ts and characteristics of us as a people.
Got it.
That, you understand? So what you have, you even have the whole trip after he becomes heavyweight champion. You have Cassius Clay coming to me and me going to the messenger and us making a trip to the Muslim world into Africa, which I'm telling you, that was not the nation's intention. That's not trust.
You got to lower your voice to give me that. I'm not getting it clear.
That is Malcolm's thrust. And Malcolm was the author. I didn't come up with that myself. I'm a trained animal. The strings are being pulled by Malcolm. So I don't even really recognize that I'm not talking of myself. I'm being guided and by Malcolm's influence over me. So in a sense, the notion is right. The nation had to watch me and be careful of my movements and so forth because I didn't belong necessarily to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I had been to Chicago a couple of times. And every time I went to Chicago, John Ali and Herbert Muhammad danced me around on 2 different occasions and never allowed me to get to the messenger. When they got through me, I got on the plane and left. And each time Malcolm grabbed me, sat me down. As a matter of fact, the first Muslim bazaar that was given in the nation, Malcolm sent me to Chicago to explain it to the messenger. The messenger, again, this was one of the first. The messenger, he said, "Brother, what are you talking about?" I was talking about black entertainers coming and rendering their services to the nation and so forth. He said, "Brother, I'm not in the world of sport and play." He said, "Why would you bring me such an idea?" Of course, I left, came back to New York City, and Malcolm grabbed me and said, "Brother," he sat me down and sent me back to Chicago and showed me how to present the idea a different way to the messenger. I explained that I come out of show business, so I had relationships with various artists. And on Sunday, black people went to churches and did not come to the mosque. So this was a chance for us to socialize with our Christian brothers. And
You're
once
tuned in to
Malcolm,
GHCR, Grant Houses Community Radio, the soul of the Upper West Side.
Go ahead, my brother.
so that was a complete reverse of how I approached the whole situation. But when I presented it like that, I said, we have relationships with people like Adam Clayton Powell and many of the clergymen. I said, but they look at us as pariahs. I said, if we can socially interact with each other on a social basis using music and entertainment as a vehicle, perhaps it could. And the messenger says, "Brother, I think." He said, "But I don't have the money." That was his major objection. So I told him, I said, I know many of these people, and I would invite them. It wouldn't cost us anything. And whatever it costs us, I will put up the money. He said, "Brother, you would do that?" And that was how we gave our first bazaar.
And you're pointing out, Brother Usman, the involvement of Malcolm as a guide and as a strategist in terms of getting things done.
I don't understand that. Restate that.
You had pointed out that the idea of going to Africa was not your idea. You said that was a strategy, if I heard you correctly, that was a strategy of Malcolm guiding you, and you in turn interacting with the messenger and getting it got approved. That's what I thought you said.
There's no doubt about that. I didn't conjure that up in my mind and never had the forethought to even do it. Malcolm is the one who took advantage of our connection and relationship in a positive sort of way with Africa and the Muslim world at nighttime, and use
Now,
that.
Brother Kareem, going back
Yes.
to the meeting that one night in Miami, and the image that's portrayed of Malcolm, is not one of too much self-assuredness. Of course, he's under quote pressure because he's outside the nation. But in terms of his interaction in that meeting, there was I didn't see the kind of strength that I would project or pick up from a Malcolm.
Well, first of all, you have to understand this. This is not real. The meeting is not real.
I'm laughing because I know that. That's why I would raise the question.
Yeah.
But this is imagery that's going out into the minds of people who will say, "Oh, I know what happened. Oh, I know." Yeah. That goes out as reality. And as long as we don't point out the contradictions or the slickness in because these things are fiction, but because they're fiction, they're constructed. You know that. I mean, I'm not telling you something you don't know. The imagery is constructed a certain way to give off a certain idea, to plant seeds.
Nine out of 10 people who saw that night in Miami. First of all, it was heavily publicized. I said, since when did they give this much attention to any kind of movie that is produced by Black people? Secondly, 9 out of 10 people who saw that could never walk away with it from that. We're talking about fiction. They consider that factual.
Yeah.
No way they could establish that as fictional in their mind. And I'm sitting here talking to you, attempting to point out something which you have, or many people listening would have problems with, because it's a far cry from what was presented. Okay? So they accomplished something. But I'm saying to you, be very careful, because I think that this is only the first step in something that they are getting ready to drop on us. Okay?
Okay. Let me slide this in there. That the opposite, or the truth of that meeting would have been 4 or 5 Black men sitting down and discussing strategy for doing independent operations, independent business. And that's not a projection that we generally see at all, unless it's some guys cutting cocaine and crack and deciding who gets what. Is that correct? So
yes, sir. The implementation of Jim Brown and his thrust on that group. The implementation of Muhammad Ali gravitating to Africa and to the Muslim world. The implementation of Sam Cooke firing his so-called accountant or manager. All of that took place after the meeting. Hello?
After the meeting, because the thrust was how to become independent. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how black men and women could begin to employ themselves, coming off the sweat, blood, and tears of a fighter in a ring, taking all that damage over the
Yeah.
years, you weren't talking about Cassius Clay. You were talking about the history of black men and women in entertainment and in sports not being
Look,
paid or able to be
look,
paid
look,
themselves. Is that correct?
look at Cassius Clay. I have not mentioned Muhammad Ali, I don't think once in our conversation. But the transformation from Cassius Clay into Muhammad Ali, it's after this meeting. It's Muhammad Ali reaching out not to his people in America, but to the world, to Africa, to the Muslim world. And the accolades that were poured on him and the attention that he, as an individual, primarily through the change of his name. Look at what happened. You can't dismiss that. Impact that it had on whatever transpired after that. That's
Wait a
what we
minute,
need.
your voice went high. Give it to me again.
I'm saying we need to transfix our minds to what I'm saying after the meeting, not what took place in the movie in the meeting, but let's look at what happened to every one of those individuals, and especially to Cassius Clay after the meeting. That is the reality. That's the thing that we must focus on. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's what we have to focus on. Well, the reality that you shared. Last in our part one, you pointed out that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave you 4 names in a telephone conversation within a week after the fight, and those names, one applied to you, one applied to Cassius Clay, one applied to Captain Sam, and
No.
okay, go ahead.
One applied to Cassius' brother.
Okay, that's the Rahman.
That's the Rahman.
Okay.
And one applied to a very close friend that never is mentioned in any of these scenarios. A brother named Omar B.R. His name was Ronald King, but the messenger gave me those names because once he okayed us going to the Muslim world, he said to me, he didn't want us to go in there with all same names. And that's why he gave me those names.
and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he's the person that always is either we're in February now. He's the invisible black man in February, unless black Muslims, Nation of Islam, promote his work, promote his significance to the rise of black consciousness in America after Marcus Garvey and Noble Drew Ali. That in concluding this interview with you, if we've covered everything that we needed to cover at this time for the film, I know I asked the question, if I'm not asking you too much, the imagery portrayed of Malcolm, for me, it was not a strong image seeing that film. Your reaction?
As part of the attempt to sabotage. They have upheld Malcolm many years, talking about Malcolm X, and then they do a hatchet job on him in this movie. But one thing you know, Malcolm X's influence, or the Nation of Islam, its influence on our people is best exemplified through Malcolm's image. Malcolm sat with intellects, poets, entertainers, people of note in our race. And he actually was the catalyst for allowing questions to even be raised about the Nation of Islam and its relevancy. Martin Luther King, John, Whitney Young, NAACP, athletes, entertainers today. Part of what they talk about, the nation or their interest, emanates from Malcolm. Not taking the word from Minister Farrakhan, who was also one of Malcolm's students, and we can't forget that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a continuance. So I don't give a damn what they projected the movie. I'm saying deal with acting.
Okay.
After the movie, okay?
Okay, I got it. So, Brother Usman Kareem, formerly another name until the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave you that name and gave you the name to pass on to Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. That's how it happened. And for folks who are listening to this interview, whenever you hear or read anything about the Nation of Islam, you should talk or try to talk to someone who's been in the Nation of Islam, at least at that period of time, and beware of those individuals who say they're Black Muslims and are not, or used to be and are not. There's tons of them out here. Some of them are preachers who say they were in the nation, and they talk against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So beware. My brother, I want to thank you. Unless there's a parting word of advice or insight that you would like to give to the audience as we close.
I would say what Black Leroy would say. Forward, ever. Backward, never.
All right. And Brother Doug, who is the engineer, thank you very much for allowing us a good portion of your time this Saturday morning. God bless you, Brother Stu, and the rest of the...
The Creator has a plan.
God bless you all. Peace.
Happiness for it.
All praise is due to Allah.
Yes, it is.
You there?